Welcome to Across the Ring. My name is William Mayhem Michaels.
And this is the scientist, Carl Schrupfer. And we are here today with Cosmo Orion. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really excited today.
Absolutely. Hey, Cosmo, before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm 21 years old. I'm a professional wrestler out of El Paso, Texas. I'm a former Pro Wrestling Legacy World Champion, the current AWF Tag Team Champion, and I'm everybody's favorite space boy.
Excellent. You're our first space boy, so this is awesome.
Amazing.
How did you first get introduced to wrestling?
So my first exposure to wrestling was probably when I was like 5 or 6 years old. I remember I was at my cousin's house and he was just like flipping channels on his television. And all of a sudden, I think it was like an episode of SmackDown. He just kind of stayed on it for a second. And I remember the image of Rey Mysterio doing like a springboard crossbody. And like back in like the old SmackDown days, like 2006 era SmackDown. And I just remember like this dude dressed in like silver with the mask on, doing all these acrobatics. And I'm like, whoa, like stop flipping the channel. What is that? He's like, oh, that's SmackDown. That's fucking Lucha Libre. It comes on every like Friday or whatever. And I was like really interested. So I told him like, how can I start watching this? And he told me, oh, it's on at like Mondays every week, like 6 p.m. So I was like, okay. So when I got home, I started flipping channels on Mondays and I landed on Raw and I started watching wrestling from then on. I was a fan since I was a little kid.
That's cool. That's kind of my favorite era is around that time as well.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up watching a lot more SmackDown than Raw because, with Monday Night Football, sometimes I had to compete with my dad for the TV. But
okay, yeah.
But yeah, that is such a fun time for wrestling, and I can see how that would pull you in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially because like I was just a little kid, so all the corny stuff, all the carny stuff, I ate it right up. Like Undertaker, all those vignettes about being spooky and like being a little demon. 7-year-old me was eating that like hotcakes, bro. Just immediately.
It's so funny because for you two, that's when you started. That's one of Carl's favorite times. That's actually when I took a break from professional wrestling.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because around 2007 is when I joined the Army, and I just had so much stuff going on outside the world that I just stopped watching it. And I, at that time, I think before that, I had been introduced to ROH, TNA was going on and stuff like that. And then after I got back out of the Army, so around 2010 is when I started picking it back up, 2009, something like that. But yeah. So we know that you got interested when you were young. Who was your some of the characters that you love to follow around that time?
When I was a kid, I was really big into like the baby faces, whoever's turn it was to be the guy on SmackDown. So Jeff Hardy, Matt Hardy, Rey Mysterio, The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, John Morrison was really big for me just because he had like all the swagger and everything. And just like whoever was like top babyface at the time, especially around like 2009, like the 2011 era of WWE. That's when I was like really into pro wrestling. And I think at one point, I wasn't as big as a John Cena fan that everybody else was. I thought he was just kind of like too perfect. I wanted flaws with my characters. Yeah. That's why I like Jeff Hardy, CM Punk when he turned babyface. I was really big into that. And then around 2012, that's when I stopped watching WWE and wrestling in general. But when I got back into it around like 2015, 16, I got really into Sting, Seth Rollins, and I want to say Kevin Owens. Like Kevin Owens was one of the first heels I really got into.
That makes sense. I'm a big fan of Kevin Owens as well. That guy is a maniac.
Yeah,
I know there's a story with him in Milwaukee. There's a venue that has like a balcony that's pretty high up, and he had to be very sternly talked to apparently to not jump off said balcony. So I could see how you're a fan of this guy, even if he is a heel. So we talk about your some of your favorite guys and stuff like that. So as you went from big wrestling fan, how did that turn into I want to be a wrestler, and how did you kind of start getting trained?
So when I was a freshman in high school, my mother gave me the dilemma. She said, "You have to join a sport in high school." And the only sport that I really liked was pro wrestling. Like no other sports really interested me. I think they're all boring. To be quite blunt about it, I think they're all boring, except for wrestling. And so I told her, like, look, I'm not going to join football. That's boring. Soccer's boring. Baseball is even more boring. I fall asleep on the golf course. The only sport I'm actually going to join is like pro wrestling, lucha libre. And she said, like, okay, fine. We'll find a way to make it work. And so my freshman year of high school, I was around 14 years old. We found a local company called NEW, and they were hosting like training classes. So I told her, like, look, if you're serious about this, you got to take me here. And then we scoped out the place. We sat through like a training class. And ever since then on, since I was 14 years old, I think back in 2017, I started training for being a professional wrestler.
That's awesome. So you got your first initial start with New Era Wrestling, correct?
Yes.
For new,
Yeah.
okay. And they just had a big show out down in El Paso this past week with Penta as the main event, correct?
Yeah, it was the big draws were Brian Cage, Penta, and Black Taurus.
Yeah, that's really cool that that was like your beginnings as
Mhm.
a promotion that's getting big names like that. So when you first started, who would you say was your big supporters?
My big supporters when I first got started was just my mother, because like as a 14-year-old, I didn't have my own license, so she had to drive me pretty much all the way across town, like 4 days a week to and from, and just I don't think she realized that pro wrestling was going to be in my future, but she just liked the fact that I was out there being active and being social at such a young age. But now that I've turned more pro, more of my family members are starting to like support me and understand that this is a long-term thing now.
So, how old were you when you had your first match?
So I started training at 14, and it was a month before my 15th birthday. So I trained for about 6 months with NEW, and then they gave me my first dark match. And so technically I debuted when I was 15, but soon after that match, I decided to stop training altogether just so I can finish high school and just get that out of the way as soon as possible. And then also I was kind of having like the dilemma of whether or not I wanted to pursue pro wrestling into the future. I was still kind of like debating what my career path was going to be. But if you want to be like technically speaking, I had my debut match at 15.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay. So you had your debut match at 15. It was kind of a dark match. You're kind of feeling it out, trying to decide, who you wanted to be. It's kind of a tough thing at that age. So when did you decide to pick back up wrestling and how did you make that decision?
So I decided to step away for a while just to kind of ensure that wrestling was something that I was really into and it wasn't just a phase. And just like every year that passed in high school, I just kept watching wrestling. I kept falling in love with wrestling, and it's like the old saying goes, like absence makes a heart grow fonder. Like every year, I was just like, when can I start training again? When can I get back into the ring? And so I decided that as soon as I graduated from high school, that I was gonna go back into training, fucking, pedal to the metal, just go as fast as possible. But then the pandemic hit, and I was stuck at home for like 2 years, and it was the worst. And that just made my passion for stepping back into the ring that much more intense. And it's just as soon as I could, literally like the day that restrictions got lifted, I started looking into places locally that were offering wrestling training. And that's where I landed on Pro Wrestling Zen, now known as Pro Wrestling Legacy. And it was like in 2021 that they started offering training classes. So as soon as I got the news, I signed up.
So you seem to have a lot of interest when you're forming your name in your tag team name, which is uh, Aerospace and then Cosmo Orion. It seems to have like a theme here. What draw you to that? like outer
So
space boys, that type of thing.
yeah. So I like personally am a really big fan of outer space. Like I'm a huge space nerd, astrology nerd through and through. It went to the point where if I wasn't a professional wrestler, I would have probably majored in astronomy in college, straight up. And so I felt like nobody at the time when I was getting into wrestling, like late 2010s era, nobody was really doing a space gimmick. And so I thought it was a good opportunity for me to jump into it and just kind of do something that nobody else was doing.
Mhm.
And then it kind of um I like creating characters like in 2K16 and all that. So I just started getting really creative with the gear, with the names, and so a pet peeve of mine in pro wrestling are this like regular dude names where it's just like name. And like I don't wanna catch heat or anything, but names like Adam Cole and even like Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, Davey Richards, where it's just like first name, first name, first name, first name. It's like it's kind of boring. Especially back in the 80s when you had these bombastic names like Macho Man, Randy Savage. He had like three different like the only regular name in Macho Man Randy Savage was Randy. That's awesome. And then you had like Ricky Steamboat, and you had like Jake Roberts, which is name, but he put the snake in there. So you kind of get the gist of what kind of person he was. And that's what the guys in the 80s did really well. Like
Right.
you could just hear their name and you'd know what they're all about. Like you wouldn't have to be a fan to know that Jake the Snake Roberts was probably some like conniving asshole, or that like Hulk Hogan was probably some like super huge dude.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to have that same idea into my name so that even when people don't know what I look like or what my gear looks like or how I'm wrestling, they would know that a guy named Cosmo Orion probably has something to do with outer space.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's where I made my wrestling name up.
You started watching wrestling in the mid 2000s, but you referenced the 80s quite a bit. So how did you find yourself pulling from the 80s and being some inspired by an era that you weren't necessarily introduced to when you first got into wrestling?
I guess it goes down to like my philosophy behind professional wrestling, where as time goes on, especially with the rise of like UFC, pro wrestling has become more sports oriented. And it's a lot more about the actual wrestling as opposed to the characters or the storylines. And then like you'd go back in time and you watch wrestling matches from the 80s and they're like super boring because all they do are just like headlocks and knee drops and chops and punches or whatever. Then you get that big comeback and then their finishers were like a DDT or like a gorilla press. It's like really basic stuff. But back in the 80s, what really sold it was character. And what really drew people to the arenas and to watch the show week after week was the characters. And it's like I said, with like regular dude names like Davey Richards and stuff like that. I'm not using him as an example because he's a good wrestler, but just like the trends seem to stray away from gimmicks and characters and being over the top and out of this world, and just regular guys being regular fighters, regular athletes, just hitting each other really hard. I think there's a market for that, but I think it's become so oversaturated that it made wrestling as a whole a little bit more boring. Whereas back in the 80s, it was like an actual Saturday morning cartoon, more of a show than a sport. Even though I still try and go out there and be match of the night, I still want to make it entertaining for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you create a character that's very much space. It sounds like the logic then is that, you're, maybe like fast or a high flyer. And so people associate that with space. So that makes a lot of sense. You have this philosophy of trying to tie these worlds together because, it sounds like, you have a mind in both worlds and not, you have the skill to do these big moves that aren't boring like the 80s, but you're able to take the good parts of it and hopefully merge them together into the perfect, type of wrestler.
Exactly. A couple of wrestlers do it like very well. I'm gonna name drop Kenny Omega in there. because I feel like he does a very good job at blending bombastic, over the top character work with like the most insane work rate I've ever seen in my entire life. And for that reason, he's, in my opinion, one of the best wrestlers going today because he knows how to mix both worlds together very well.
That's perfect. So kind of leading into that, who are some of your biggest influences to the way you wrestle today?
So I watched a lot of Japanese professional wrestling. When I started watching wrestling again in like 2016, that's when I started recognizing wrestlers from like Ring of Honor and New Japan Pro Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Noah. And what I really love about wrestling is how creative people can get in hurting a. And so the more innovating you can get inside the ring, you're probably going to be a favorite of mine. Kenny Omega, as mentioned before, a lot of Kota Ibushi, a lot of Naomichi Marufuji over in Noah, Kenta over in Noah, and Máscara Dorada, also known as Grand Metalik from Mexico. He's a guy I was also studying a lot too. Just those four, I love the way they use the ring in different ways. They hit you with the move you've never seen before. That's what I really liked about Ring of Honor, because you'd see at least one move you'd never seen before ever, in like on TV or anything. So those are like my main five guys. Yeah.
I'm going to mention one more, and he's kind of growing here a lot lately, especially after his match in AEW against Kenny Omega, El Hijo del Vikingo. That guy,
oh yeah,
phenomenal. But yeah, like to what Carl said earlier about your building your character work, people and the way they think. It's like you being a space boy, you're the man without gravity, right? I kind of want to get into what your like hobbies and life outside of wrestling's like. I know you mentioned being a big fan of astrology. What are some of the other things that you're really into?
So I'm actually pretty introverted in real life, so I don't have a whole lot of like things I do outside of just working, going to the gym, and wrestling. But I will say I'm big into, I guess it's not a hobby, but like heavy metal. I'm a big metalhead. And, recently, I don't know why, but I've really gotten into magic, like magic tricks. I love being fooled. I love if you're a good magician and you can make me rethink like the laws of physics and reality, you think that's a great magician right there. I love being fooled like that. And
That's really crazy that you mentioned magic, because this is actually the second time magic's ever been mentioned on this podcast.
Yeah.
I think it's incredible that wrestlers can make this like mental connection where, there's a sense of magic in wrestling. And so it kind of sounds like maybe that's something that tickles your interest, where having this, magic and having wrestling being a big part of your life, it almost, inspires you in a new way.
I just find that there are a lot of like ties between magic and pro wrestling, especially the entire like, don't reveal the secrets of it. It's kind of tempting in that way. So I purposefully don't look up how magic tricks are done because I want to be fooled. Like I love being in the audience seat for magic tricks. I don't want to go behind the curtain. I love being fooled. But I guess similarly, I'm also big into like the circus, like Cirque du Soleil, because
Cirque du Soleil is awesome.
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
I freaking love
For real. Like if you want to talk about sports entertainment, it's the circus. Like if we're being real here, you have gymnasts, aerialists, even like the clowns. A circus will give you a complete show. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll cringe, you'll faint. Like it's the complete package. And I find pro wrestling to be very similar to a circus. I mean, they had like the carnival days back in like the 1800s, so they kind of branched out the same path. But there's something about doing a performance that's like very physical and very like fine-tuned, both in wrestling and in the circus, that I can't help but appreciate. Like there's a lot of work that goes into both. I try and like take a little bit of something and incorporate it into my wrestling. So there's some things I've learned from like metal musicians that I incorporate into my wrestling, from magicians, from circus performers, from like poets even, or just taking little bits and pieces from different media and different forms of entertainment and putting it into my wrestling that I hopefully was going to make me stand out among all the other wrestlers on the show.
So we've talked about how you got into wrestling, and we talked about some of your hobbies. You recently had two major events happen to you in the past weeks. The first one was Aerospace becoming new tag team champions. So you ended up going home 10 pounds heavier.
Yep.
How did you find out that you were going to win the gold? And how did it make you feel?
So when they told us we were gonna win the gold, I thought they were ribbing us because it was like so sudden and so like out of the blue. Because we for that three-way tag match, we already had everything planned out. We had like everything was good to go, and then I want to say like 5 minutes before the show started, maybe like during the opening match, they went up to us and they went up to me and Gmo specifically, and they were like, "By the way, you guys are up on Aiden Colt. You got to make sure you pin Aiden Colt." And so I was looking at Gmo, I was looking at him, and I was like, I think he's just ribbing us just because we're from Texas. But I went over to Aiden, and he's like, "Did you hear what they said?" And he's like, "Yeah, man, you guys are winning." And I was like, "Oh, is for real? Okay." And so we had to very quickly just kind of reorganize the entire match, but it was kind of surreal. And then also, I didn't realize that the match was for the titles. I thought it was like a contendership match, and then next month would be for the titles. But turns out it was for the titles.
And I kind of thought that it was just a contendership match because when Aiden came out on the mic, he says, "We're competing for the contendership too." And I was like, wait, is this for the titles or is it for contendership? So I did catch that. But yeah, dude, it's freaking amazing. The other thing that I want to talk about, your second big thing was on Heatwave, Chubby Depp and Turbo were getting attacked, and you came out to make it seem like you were about to make the save, and you quickly turned on them and activated Plan B. For those who don't know, B's Bastards. Tell us
Yeah.
about that faction and how that decision came for you to join them.
So again, I wasn't told until I think the day of the show that I was joining the Bastards. So it's the wrestling business. You got to think on the fly. You just got to go with it sometimes. But the Bastards, they're like a heel unit, our main heel stable over in El Paso, and it's led by Marty Snow, and it's got Midas in it. And it used to have a wrestler called Super Flash in it, but they kicked him out for being the weak link. And so for like a couple months, they were working as just a tag team. But like the day of show, they were saying, "Do you want to join the Bastards?" And I thought I thought they weren't serious. So I was like, "Yeah, I'll join them. Why not? Like, we'll see what happens." And then they wrote it into the show that I was joining, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I guess." But yeah, so we just did the whole Plan B thing, and I was already like a heel in El Paso.
Yeah.
It's a whole storyline thing where I used to be world champion, and then I got screwed out, and I just kept spiraling downwards, and then I was just on a huge losing streak, and then I finally snapped, and so I was just kind of riding a wave of to put me with the Bastards to keep it like the main trio in El Paso. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I learned the day of. I was like, "Marty, do you have like an extra shirt you can throw at me?" And he's like, "Yeah, I got you." So we got the extra shirt, and we went with it.
I think that's really cool that there's being so much thought put into this like whole story of you, kind of, being up on top and then, having this huge fall from grace. And then out of desperation, you've got to join this heel faction to help, really bolster yourself up again and get some momentum. It's cool to see, these storylines playing out, not just on TV, but even, it shows that you could be attending, in your own hometown. I think that's incredible. But so to talk about that a bit, earlier you said that, you were a big fan of baby faces growing up. For you to be now a wrestler that wrestles heel, especially in El Paso there, how was that for you to learn how to be a heel after idolizing baby faces for such a long time?
A really big fan of baby faces, and when I was training, I would emulate the baby face, and so I felt most natural being the face and kind of being the underdog and fighting from beneath and all that. And for the first year of my career, I was working babyface, but I felt in a way, maybe it was just me, but I felt like I was getting boring or that my character was being a bit stale because the one that gets most promo time is going to be the heel. The one that gets to shine with the most character is going to be the heel during the heat. And like as a babyface, all I can do was sell and fire up. And so I felt like character wise, I was falling behind everybody else. So I was thinking about turning heel. But then our top heel in the company, which was Marty Snow, he left to go train over in Orlando. And so all of a sudden there's a huge to be filled. And so they were like, do you want to turn heel, like for real, and just fill the spot on the roster for a while? And I said, yeah. So I turned heel, and at first it was a legit challenge because I was so used to being babyface, just going through the motions, having people cheer for me, and just like, being good guy, trademark good guy. But as I turned heel, I had to do so many new things. I had to wrestle in a different position, like in the match. Like I've never done a heat ever. And so doing a heat was like something I actually had to learn through the motions of it. And it was challenging, but the more reps I got, I feel like the better and more natural it became to just be a bastard heel.
Yeah. So reinventing yourself is one of the big things in wrestling. You always have to constantly reinvent yourself and to keep yourself relevant and to kind of keep yourself on your toes, right? So one of my questions I have for you, and I've seen Gmo kind of play around with this online. He says technically I'm kind of part of the Bastards, right?
Yeah.
Are we going to see both Aerospace Boys in the Bastards, you think, or what do you think is going to happen with that?
I don't think so, but as I said before, anything could happen in wrestling. But I think we have a good like dynamic in play, like a good moral dynamic going on, where Gmo is very obviously this like. So there's an inside joke between like the boys where it's like Gmo is like my non-toxic boyfriend, and then the Bastards are like my toxic exes that are just like ruining me. And I like the idea of playing with that. So when I'm tagging with Gmo, like in Arizona, I'm more of a white meat baby face because he brings out the good in me. But whenever I'm with the Bastards, they're like the bad influence, kind of like douchebag kids at the lunch table, and they're bringing out the worst in me. And there's a lot of potential. I don't want to give too much away, but there's a lot of potential. Yeah.
So
and just a feud like that.
So you talked a bit about you were worried about getting stale, so you reformed your character, became a heel to give yourself a new dynamic and learn more about being a wrestler and being a better wrestler. So the fact that you have this, mindset to, always be better, always improve, what are some goals for you in the future as your wrestling career grows?
So short-term goals, I really want to start wrestling in more places. I've been to Vegas. I wrestled in Vegas before, obviously in Phoenix and El Paso. I've been back and forth from Houston, but I really like to start branching out and going to as many different places as possible. Again, a lot of that has to do with, I guess, watching wrestling from all over the world because I don't want to stay in the United States for too long. I eventually want to go branch out and go to Mexico, go to Europe, go to Japan, really see what the global context of wrestling looks like in every other place of the world. But like long term, I know I have a lot of peers that say my goal in wrestling is to sign with X company or to win X championship. But personally, my long-term goal is to go out as one of the best professional wrestlers in the history of this business. Like that is my long-term goal. I really am not picking favorites. I don't want to say like, well, I want to achieve that by going to this company or that company or this country or that country. I just want to have a good portfolio of work when it's all said and done to where people will say, like, oh, who's the best wrestler in the world? Or who's the greatest wrestler of all time? And they'll say, Eddie Guerrero, Hiroshi Tanahashi, Mystico, Cosmo Orion, and the name. But I just want to be included in that conversation. That's my long-term goal in wrestling.
I love that a lot. I get excited when anytime we're on with a wrestler and they say that they want to, travel the world more, especially when it's somebody that's not in my area, because coming out of a conversation like we're having, with you, my mindset is like, man, I really hope this guy comes to Milwaukee so I can see this guy wrestle with Milwaukee guys and see how, he goes toe to toe with different guys. I'm sure you're thinking, oh, I want to go to New York, or maybe you want to go to Florida. You talked about other countries too. I'm really excited to hear that you have such, high goals and you set such a high standard for yourself. You seem like you're a bit of a gym rat. You seem like someone that, really cares about all the facets of what it takes to be a professional wrestler. And I, for one, am impressed by what you've told us.
Yeah, just like having that very high ambition, it's almost like on purpose, because I feel like if my goal was to, let's say, sign with WWE and I signed with them when I'm 26, it's like, okay, I reached my life goal. Now what? Now what do I do? And so when I have such an ambitious goal like that, it's something that will keep motivating me to be better, like until I die. Essentially, it's always that pushing factor into being better than I was yesterday. But it could be dangerous, and it could be like almost self-sabotage in a way, because I see wrestlers like a lot younger than me, for example, like Nick Wayne, Billy Starks, who are just having like this insane amount of success already, and I feel like I'm playing a game of catch up. And I know it's all mental, because I'm young in and of myself, but I feel like I'm behind in a race.
Kind of going off of what you were talking about, I feel like everybody kind of has that feeling, whether they're a wrestler or otherwise, where, you see some, young guy that, maybe he's a couple years younger that is seeing successes you haven't seen yet. And it can be disheartening sometimes to, have that happen. It's happened to me, Will. I'm sure it's happened to you as well. I feel like it's a very human experience to kind of deal with that.
Yeah, especially in a wrestling business, like you see guys that are getting, all this praise online, and then they keep really successful, and then you're like sitting there like, well, damn, I could have been that, but time's cruel, and I'm not that young, but I'm thinking pretty good. But like again, it's all mental. Like there's no such thing as like a race in wrestling. You really just carve out your own path. You do whatever you want. And there are people that don't want to sign to big companies, that are content just kind of being the local wrestler or cruising like the indie scene. And so like it's just whatever you want it to be at the end of the day. Like it's your career. You got to have fun. You just, live the life that you want,
So yeah, you talking about, age and stuff like that, being no, like it being a race or anything basing on time. I mean, you guys got to remember that DDP started in his late 30s, and there's been other wrestlers that have started as late. So I don't think you're necessarily behind the curve. Maybe if you base yourself on each wrestler, but the truth is, when it comes to pro wrestling, you never know when you're going to start out and what level you're going to make it to, because DDP, it took him no time to end up on WCW and then WWE. So, I mean, it's definitely you at 21, you have a lot of time to work your way through the world, and I think you have an amazing
Work ethic.
work ethic and goal to get in, because like when you go, like I would love to see you in Japan. I would love to see you on Noah. I'm not going to lie, and New Japan. I know Carl and I are both big fans of overseas. I love progressive. I love, over in the UK and stuff like that. There's a lot of different styles for you to kind of combat. Like even just going to Canada, there's different styles up there that you can learn from. So the fact that you had that as a goal to travel the world and go to those is amazing. But I also wanted to make sure you realize, like, there's older guys that kicked in late too, and they had a hell of a career as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's the saying that goes like it takes somebody 10 years to become an overnight success. And I think that's very true, especially in wrestling. Because I remember seeing like someone like Alex Zane. He had an insane career in the indies in like backyard wrestling. And then it took like just one spot in GCW and his career lit up like wildfire. And I'm I don't want to say like I'm relying on that phrase to be real for me, but I understand that I have a lot of time between, my rookie years and then like my peak, whenever that's going to be. And so I really want to take advantage of like the first 10 years or so, like in my wrestling career, to just learn as much as I can inside the ring, outside the ring. That's why I really want to travel so much, so I can wrestle people from all over like the United States. I want to go to Milwaukee and see how guys wrestle in Milwaukee. I want to go to North Carolina and New York, up in Canada, down in Mexico, Japan. Like I want to take this early part of my career and use it to really form myself as a pro wrestler, so that when I do hit those peak years, I'm ready to go.
I would love to see you in OVW, to be honest. But
okay,
that's like I'm a big fan of that part. Like, but I'd like to see you in Milwaukee as well, like Carl mentioned, because I wasn't introduced to Milwaukee wrestling until I met Carl, and I'm a fan. Like he's like, man, you got to watch this match, you got to watch this, you got to watch this, and with our studies with doing our interview with Marman, I'm such a fan of that area, the Midwest. But Carl, you got anything?
Yeah, I think we've had a really great interview today, and we've talked a lot about you, who you are as a person, the way you think, your ambitions, really every facet of you. But fans can be fickle, and despite all the evidence we've given so far as to why you're such a great wrestler, what do you have to say to these wrestling fans that are still holding out, that want to know a little more about why they should come see you wrestle?
So I'd say that I am a mix of a lot of things. Not only so in wrestling, the way I was trained was a mix of lucha libre and American style wrestling. And that's everybody in El Paso right now. It's such like we're a border town, so you get that mix of cultures, mix of wrestling styles. So if you want a good mix, you can see my in-ring stuff and you can kind of get a taste for what we do. But also, I'm a mix of just taking different things from different places. The best advice I ever got was to seek wisdom from other avenues. Because if you seek it from one place, it's gonna get stale. It's gonna get old. So I don't wrestle as like, well, how do I put this? Like everything I've learned on how to be a wrestler and how I present myself wasn't just from watching wrestling. I watched so many other things, even like weird, like, and really niche forms of theater. I take inspiration from. I take inspiration from the circus, inspiration from metal music and punk music. I take inspiration from books I've read. I take inspiration from magicians I've seen. I take inspiration from like regular people in my life. And so I try to be more than just another wrestler. I try to be a weird, gross concoction of different types of entertainers. And I'm still learning, but I'm pretty sure I got something cooking in the lab.
It's that time again to close it out. I do want to remind everybody to check out our shows across all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram. Check us out on Instagram on Across the Ring. Also, check us out on all platforms as far as podcast goes, Spotify, Amazon, Pandora. We're on everything. Just check us out. I also want to take the time and thank Cosmo Orion for being on the show.
Thank you, guys.
Absolutely, brother. And also follow him on Instagram as well. He goes by the Cosmo Orion on Instagram. And I also want to remind everyone, you never know who's right across the ring.